So we'll go next to Russell from Australia. Now, I had the privilege of meeting Russell and his wife several years ago at Congress, and it was such a privilege to meet these wonderful Australians. And so Russell, as the Australian ARE contact person, has been studying the readings for more than 40 years. He has lectured in Australia on dreams, meditation, soulmates, and right livelihood. And he's also developed the only game based on the EDGAR CAYCE readings called Sojourn the Game. So Russell, it's up to you.
Well, thank you, John, and thank you to your team. And I'd just like to also welcome Keith Alderson from South Australia. I saw him has linked into this conference. I'd also like to thank Judith for the wonderful work that she's done, including when I first went to the ARE in 1981. And she took me under her wing and showed me around and made sure that I got to meet so many people, and even took me out to lunch with Gladys Davis Turner and Elsie Sechrist. And I don't think I said a word during that entire lunch. I was just so awestruck by these two wonderful people from the Cayce original work that were just chatting about the time that they were with Edgar Cayce himself. So thank you, Judith. And I'm just so thrilled to be able to be part of this international community. Even though we're so far away from Virginia Beach, I've been fortunate to travel there 7 times, and just loved meeting so many people over all those years, including John, on the 4 more recent times. I'd also like to acknowledge the Jaja Wurrung peoples of Australia. That's the local tribe of Aboriginal peoples here in my area, the original custodians of this land and their elders past and present. And I'd very much like to thank Olive Bell, who was my predecessor as the representative for Australia, and all the work that she did over many, many years before she retired in 2013. Now, with that said, I've got a PowerPoint, and I must apologise if things don't work too well here. This is only the 2nd time I've run a PowerPoint during a talk. Here we go. Hopefully that's showing up now.
Yeah, we see it. We see it, Russell. Thank you.
Good. Okay, so g'day from Australia. One of the other locals just poking their head out there, the youngster. It's yeah, just an amazing place to live, but the international travel to get to places like the US, as I'm sure Kevin would have acknowledged when he came here, it's just so tiring. Okay. The next screen. Now, I'll just move that so that everyone can see the whole screen. I just love this whole concept of oneness out of many one, e pluribus unum, that the world just seems so divided at the moment. And 2 of my favourite ARE press books are from a long, long time ago. Linda Gerber Quest, who wrote Peace by Choice, and I've got some quotes here from that book, but also The Politics of Hope. Just sensational books that have never lost their relevance. So I'd just like to read a couple of things about oneness and how important it is, especially at this time in the Earth's history. In the foreword to her 1974 ARE press booklet, Peace by Choice, Linda Gerber Quest states, Two outstanding facts characterise the world today: division and interdependence. At all levels of human organisation, we find ourselves unable to get along with one another, and we find ourselves equally unable to get along without one another. Tension, ambiguity, uncertainty accompany our present situation of being able neither to subsist alone nor to work together. The resultant strains give rise to two predominant moods: anxiety and discontent. We live in a society, we live in a culture, we live in a world, none of which possesses the balance, the rhythm, the integration necessary for survival. To persist in our conventional thought patterns, to react in our accustomed ways, is to assure our collective collapse. Now, that was written in 1974, or published in 1974. And, 47 years later, I think we're still in the same situation. And matter of fact, I think it's deteriorated further because there's a polarisation, there's a division between peoples around the world at the moment, and we just see it and hear it all the time. The news is full of peoples who are one side of an argument or the other side of the argument. And, at the moment it's anti-vaxxers or those who want to be vaccinated. In America it's the Republicans and the Democrats that seem to be at war with one another. In Australia we've got the same in our political systems. It's just undermining what little tolerance or compassion we have left for one another. Now, further into her booklet, Linda Quest states, crisis is not trauma nor emotional upset, not stress nor strain, but a point of choice. Crises such as war, famine, plague, and natural disaster were regarded by the ancients of classical antiquity as revealers of men's souls, of their true characters or inner selves. Presented with a crisis, what does one choose? Self or service? Would we be wise to face the fact that at-one-ment will be produced, but that it can come about either the hard way or the easy way, through reckoning and levelling, which is the selfish way, or through aligning or attuning, the way of service? So we have this choice before us. Now, there appears to be a bit of a crisis at the ARE at the moment. And this was touched on by Judith when she mentioned 1931, where the ARE, we lost the hospital building, there was the closure of Atlantic University, there was the withdrawal of financial support, the demise of the Association of National Investigators, which was the forerunner of the ARE. And that would have been devastating for the small group of supporters around EDGAR CAYCE. But as at that time, the birthing pains of the next phase of the experience for this group of souls are a necessary process so that we can learn to let go and let God. The unseen forces and the unseen influences are working with us to bring about a new era for the ARE if we are willing to allow these forces to guide us through this difficult period as they did 90 years ago. And there is a beautiful concept given in one of the work readings, 25492, and I've got a section of that here. So, in thy considerations, seek ye to know more and more of how each organisation has its counterpart, bodily, mentally, spiritually, and guidance may be given thee. Ye have an organisation then with a physical being, with a mental being, with a spiritual concept, and only that which is not merely idealistic, but in keeping with God's, Christ's precepts, Jesus' anointings, may be that which may grow and become as a living thing in the experience, in the bodies, in the minds, yea, to the very awareness of the souls of men whom such a group, such an organisation would serve. And I think all of this is just so relevant for today, because it's just the whole purpose of why we're here is to bring about God's, Christ's plan for the earth, because we're part of that. We've been part of it in Egypt, we've been part of it in Persia, we're still part of it wherever we are in the world today. So that was my take on oneness, out of many one, that it's more urgent, more relevant today than ever, because there's just such a polarisation that we're seeing. And we can't let the world slide. We have to bring about a greater sense of oneness. Now, I just wanted to also talk a little bit about EDGAR CAYCE in the ARE in Australia. In the early years, and I was maybe not involved in the 1960s, but I was certainly involved in the 1970s. So the first groups formed and the seminars arranged were by John Shepherd, which was a fairly appropriate name, in Melbourne, Australia, which is close to where I live in southern Australia. And Shirley Malcolm with her husband Ralph became the ARE representatives, and a prayer group was formed. And groups were also started in Brisbane. And then when I joined in the late 1970s, there was about 20 Search for God groups in Melbourne, Brisbane and Adelaide, probably at least 10 in Melbourne, maybe 12, at least 7 or so in Brisbane, and probably at least 3 in Adelaide. Retreats and seminars were held every 6 months. We held those with up to 45 attendees in Melbourne. Now, Melbourne's a large city. We have currently over 4.5 million people living in Melbourne, so it's a very large city compared to 3,500 where I live. But in the late 1970s, a group actually travelled to Virginia Beach, and the EDGAR CAYCE bookshop was established in Melbourne. Then into the 1980s, we hosted a visit by Bill and Elsie Sechrist. They actually came and stayed with me. I was living in a town called Geelong at that time, about an hour and a bit from Melbourne by car. And I organised a dream workshop for them in Geelong. A mini moot conference was held in Brisbane with 45 attendees. I counted them because I had a photo of all the people that were there. That was held in 1982, and that was the last conference held in Australia until 2019. So it was a long time between international conferences. And interestingly enough, at that conference, I remember there was a medical doctor who gave a talk, and he ran a health retreat centre not far from Brisbane, up in the hills behind the Gold Coast. And on the day off during the conference, I took a minibus with a whole lot of visitors from southern states, and we drove up and visited his centre up in the hinterland of the Gold Coast, which was beautiful. He had a magnificent healing centre up there called Raphael Healing Centre. There was another international attendee of that conference, Lawrence Follis from New Zealand, who was a hypnotherapist, and he shared some amazing stories of help for people by taking them back to past lives, and even talked about taking people back to Atlantis. And he had one subject who was able to draw many things about Atlantis. The other interesting thing about the medical doctor and his centre was that 4 years later, he married my wife and I, which was pretty amazing because he was also a liberal Catholic priest, as well as being a medical doctor. And I didn't know my wife at the time. And in 1983, a year after that conference, my wife went to a conference in Queensland where he was a guest speaker as well. My wife and I didn't know each other at the time. And she even thought she would love to be able to visit his centre. And then we were 3 years later, he married us at his centre. Also in the 1980s, there were monthly talks and prayer group meetings in Melbourne, an over-the-wall prison program with a Search for God group was started at Penchridge Prison in Melbourne. And we used to go into the prison, and it was in H Division, which was the worst of the worst inmates in there. And that program ran until some of the prisoners decided to take over the wall a little bit too literally. Not quite, they actually tunnelled under the wall and escaped. So the program was terminated by the prison authorities after that happened. In the 1990s, we formed a new Search for God group with 7 members, which 5 were in Melbourne, and my wife and I were living in Ocean Grove, where we currently live. And we continue to offer retreats and seminars and monthly prayer group meetings in Melbourne. Also in the early 90s, our group hosted a visit by Meredith Puryear and organised a workshop she presented in Melbourne. Then into the 2000s, my wife and I had to withdraw from active involvement with ARE activities apart from the prayer group and occasional retreats to devote our time to work and family, because our family were in need of our full attention, and our work life was in need of our full attention at that time. A very interesting story that in 1990, I actually went to, in 1989, my wife and I attended the New Year's Eve retreat. And my wife had an experience where she felt a presence in the room in the hotel that we were staying at. And she suddenly realised that there was an entity there waiting to be born. And she said to this entity, "Oh, look, sorry, we've finished our family. There's lots of spiritual families here in Virginia Beach that you can go and be born to them." And that night she had a dream. There was this little fair-haired boy was knocking on a door of a room. She would open the door, see who it was, and shut the door. He looked about 2 years old. And that happened about 5 times that he knocked on different doors, and my wife was opening the door and shutting the door to him. Well, he must have followed us home, because the next year my wife fell pregnant and we had this little fair-haired boy that had followed us all the way from Virginia Beach, a new addition to our family. So we had to devote our time to our family in the 2000s. But in early 2010s, we recommenced our Search for God study with our Melbourne group. One member, Anne Glenn, had moved back to Scotland. So our weekly meetings were then via Skype, which worked really well, because it was always evening for us and morning in Scotland for Anne. From 2012 to 2015, Maria and my wife and I attended Congress in Virginia Beach, and look, we just made so many wonderful friends. And in 2013, I was asked to take on the role of ARE contact for Australia after the retirement of Olive Bell. And Olive bequeathed to us her lending library of books, which she packed up and sent down to put into our little centre here in Creswick. In 2014, our group established the EDGAR CAYCE Australia, a not-for-profit organisation. We recommenced prayer group meetings. Now, mind you, the prayer group had been going since the mid-1970s, but we actually were meeting face-to-face again in our small centre here in Creswick, which happens to be just a unit behind our house. That's where we were holding all the meetings. And we commenced our quarterly e-newsletter, Southern Lights. And I think we're up to edition 28 or something now. In 2016, I was invited to join the Strategic Activities Committee of the ARE Board of Trustees, and enjoyed the opportunity to serve the ARE for 3 years as an at-large member representing the international community, all of those contacts were by telephone. Fortunately, they tried to arrange those meetings at a time that was suitable for me. And I would have to thank John for allowing me to speak at late morning, my time, and not 2 a.m., which would have been a little bit difficult. Yes, I really appreciated that opportunity to serve with the SAC committee in setting the 5 and 10 year plans for the whole of the ARE. Now, very recently, in 2016, we started a Facebook page, EDGAR CAYCE Australia Inc., with daily Monday to Friday caption photos similar to Thought for the Day. In 2019, we held our international conference, the first since 1982, in March of that year, titled EDGAR CAYCE on Reincarnation, Your Odyssey Through Time, with Kevin Tedeschi as the keynote speaker. And as I said, Kevin was probably pretty jet-lagged, arriving just before the conference, but he didn't show it. He was at his dynamic best. He was fantastic. Of course, as with everyone else, in 2020, COVID-19 put most of our activities on hold, including plans for Maria and I to attend Congress again. Now, it was interesting, the airfares to fly to the US at the beginning of 2020 were so low, I couldn't believe it. But I just couldn't book. So I said to Maria, what's going on? I can't book the airfares. And she said, well, she'll check in, and she's very psychic. So she asked her guidance, what's the problem that we can't book the airfares to the US? And the guidance was, it will not be safe. So we thought, well, gee, what's Trump going to get up to that would make it not safe to fly to the US? And then, of course, a couple of months later, COVID hit. So we realised what was going on and why we were prevented from booking to go to the US. 2021, we've trialled using Zoom for a prayer group meeting, and we've actually formed a new Search for God study group, including Keith, who's joined into this conference, with members in 3 different states of Australia, and that's been going strong now for 6 months. So we realised that this can be done, and it's always been a problem here in Australia. So few people interested in the Cayce material, the Cayce work, scattered over such a large country. And any time people have tried to start study groups, it's always been the same problem, that they might be in the same city, but because they're 40 minutes drive apart, it's just too difficult to meet face to face. But with Zoom, with Skype, with these sorts of electronic communication devices, I think we've finally found a way to bring together people from all parts of Australia, even when we're in different time zones. Might be difficult in Perth, which is currently 3 hours behind us. 2022 and beyond, our group is also looking into the possibility of holding seminars via Zoom similar to this retreat, knowing full well that we can even have overseas presenters, if it's the right time zone, and save on them having to pay for airfares or be jet lagged, or and even people within Australia flying to a venue and paying for accommodation near that venue. So I think that Zoom is just a wonderful modality. And looking into the future, I think that I mentioned to John that one of the issues that we seem to be facing, and is probably our greatest challenge at the moment, is succession planning. Because our group is now at the same age that our mentors were when they handed over the reins to us in the mid-1990s. And there seems to be a language barrier to attract younger members. I had an email yesterday from someone who was trying to read our latest newsletter, complaining that she was finding it difficult, very difficult, almost impossible to understand the Cayce readings. And I said to her that in my response, I'm lucky that I am bilingual, English and Cayceese, because after 40 years of studying the readings, I can understand them, and I actually prefer them rather than having them converted into everyday English. Just some of the highlights of, my past 40 odd years. I became a member of ARE in 1981 when I went to Virginia Beach for the first time. But it wasn't until 3 years ago that I actually became a life member of ARE. And so I've been a member for 40 years now. I'm so privileged that I met my wife, who contacted me and wanted me to start a study group. She had a venue, she had some members that were willing to start a study group with her. And what better way to meet your future partner in life than through a study group? And as I said, we were married in 1986 by this doctor that his name was Jeff Miller, who ran a centre on the Gold Coast. And we've just had the most amazing experiences together. Now, I'll just see what the next slide is. It up. There we go. So I've got some photos to share. That is a photo of most of the attendees at our 2019 International Conference, with Kevin sitting in the middle there next to my wife, Maria, and I'm standing at the back, basically between the two of them with my hands raised. That was just the most wonderful event, something that we'd wanted to do for so many years, but in 2019 it actually took place. So we were thrilled that Kevin agreed to come and be the keynote speaker for that conference. That is a photo, or the front cover of our quarterly newsletter, Southern Lights. Also, people from one of our prayer group meetings. And in that group of people, in the back row, the two on the left and the two on the right are part of our actual study group. It's been going since, well, for coming up 30 years. And the two in the front on the left are also members of our study group. And that's my wife in the darker green on the left at the front, and I'm the tall one on the right at the back. And in the middle at the back, some of you may recognise Henry Conley. I'm sure that Elise will have fond memories of Henry, because he certainly had fond memories of Elise. Some photos from Virginia Beach. On the right is my wife with some tall guy that we met there each time we went. Some of you may know John. On the left is my wife and myself with another friend who's part of our study group, Beryl, surname Cayce, coincidentally, but not spelt the same way. The photo in the middle was taken at one of the congresses. I'm not sure which one, but I think it was someone demonstrating one of the Cayce moves, chiropractic moves for adjusting the spine. It's something like that. I'm not quite sure what it was. Maybe they were dancing. We've managed to attend a few psychic and wellbeing expos, and that's two of our group members there with our stall at one of the expos. That's Beryl and Donna. We used to sell books. Unfortunately, we don't sell books anymore. It was just getting too difficult price-wise for them. And the photo on the right is a meeting at our little centre behind our house. With this was a prayer group meeting. Okay. Now, I don't know whether anyone, if I hold this up, people may not be able to see it because you might only be able to see the screen. No, you can't see it. It's a book I came across the other day. In 1977, I travelled to India and I actually found two EDGAR CAYCE books in India, one of which was There Will Your Heart Be Also. And it had a bookmark in it. So I opened it up and it was on chapter 4, Choosing Your Partner. So that was something vitally important to me back in 1977. My wife's just standing at the door to my office here, listening to what I'm talking about. It was just interesting that in India, most marriages are arranged marriages, and I happened to witness the meeting between a couple and their son and another couple and their daughter in a railway waiting room, and they were obviously being introduced as potential marriage material because the adults engaged in deep conversation and the two young people just kept furtively looking at one another. And the pages of the Times of India back in 1977 were full of advertisements requesting partners for sons or daughters, suitable partners. And it's still apparently over 90% of people in India are married through arranged marriages. But because of what I've read from the Cayce material, I'm pretty certain that all marriages are arranged marriages. I know that ours certainly was. I don't know how much say we had in it, but we thought that we had free will choice, but I think behind the scenes it was being arranged because we've been together so many times previously. Okay, moving on to the next slide. John mentioned that I developed a game based on the EDGAR CAYCE readings called Sojourn's the Game. This slide shows the game board. It's a board game, and this is a slide showing the board, which is made up of 6 lifetimes. Lifetimes range from ancient Atlantis through to ancient Egypt, Persia, Palestine, France, and America. And the way that the game is played is by drawing karma cards. And the karma cards on the back of them have paraphrased Cayce readings, such as you learn to love self and not be condemning, go forward 5 spaces. There's another one there I have, you have not used the talents with which you were born, go back to birth. So in each lifetime, there's 33 spaces, starting with birth and ending with death. And you just move around the board by selecting karma cards in turn. And John said that he hated getting the one which was the first shall be last and the last shall be first. Exchange places with the person who is last. So, and all of these are basically physical, mental, emotional, or spiritual principles from the Cayce readings, which you've either used or not used. So you either go forward in the game or go backwards in the game, and eventually move your way around until you finish the lifetime in America. And really, you can also earn grace cards, which are the other green cards there, but you can only use that card to counteract an instruction on the board itself, not by to counteract a karma card that you didn't like. So it's a lot of fun. It's a way of learning about the Cayce material in a fun way. As John said, though, it's not so great now with COVID around. Makes it more difficult to play things like this face-to-face. I managed to take it to the ARE a few times and played it at Congress and sold a few at Congress. It's not available for sale, unfortunately, because I had no way of actually folding it up and putting it in a box to send it to people. But it was actually given to me in the late 1980s. It's been around for a long time. I actually took it to America in 1990 when I travelled there and played it with study groups in different places all over America. Okay, so that's the game. And now, John suggested that I would like to share some of the gems I've found from the EDGAR CAYCE readings. Now, one of the gems that I really love is the idea of what our group calls the Adjustment Bureau, which is named after one of my favourite movies, which came out in 2011, which is about it's a tale about a man who stumbles upon a vast, powerful and unseen world that exists on the periphery of our own. If you haven't seen this movie, I think it's on a par with Groundhog Day as far as providing us with spiritual principles. Groundhog Day was about reincarnation. The Adjustment Bureau is about the unseen forces at work behind the scenes, guiding us in our lives. And in the movie, a senior agent of the Adjustment Bureau, Richardson, tells Matt Damon's character, David Norris, who had accidentally observed the Bureau at work, "You're seeing behind the curtain right now. You were never supposed to see this, but you have, and we're going to have to ask you not to ever tell anybody about this." And I just put in a few readings there that EDGAR CAYCE shared about the unseen forces or unseen influences. And one of my favourites is that know rather that the unseen influences in the experience of every soul are greater than those that are seen. And then another one says that that there are that impetus in the activities of unseen influences to act upon the mental abilities and capabilities of many individuals and groups in trying to bring to the greater masses that of harmony and peace from the chaos that has existed so long in the experience of many. And I think that just sums up just how important the unseen forces, the unseen influences are to individuals and to groups to bring harmony and peace out of chaos. So we're not working at this by ourselves. We've got a whole team at work behind the scenes. And it's just so wonderful to know that they're there doing this. So I will just go on to the next slide. Other gems from the EDGAR CAYCE readings. I won't necessarily read the readings themselves about psoriasis, which Cayce didn't call leaky gut syndrome, but it's certainly been termed in more recent times. Leaky gut syndrome is one of the main causes of psoriasis. But many years ago, we'd just come to this region and we were in a shop nearby that we'd never been to before. And a woman came up to me and said, "Are you the Russell?" And I'd never seen her before. And I said, "Yes, my name's Russell Bowey." And she said, "You're going to cure me of psoriasis." Unfortunately, my wife and I never did find out how she knew me, but I didn't know her and we never asked her. But so I had, in the early 1990s, I had to research psoriasis, which was a little bit difficult back then because there was no online access to information. And using that, my wife is a kinesiologist. And so she was able to work with this woman. She was in her 70s. Her doctor had told her, you have psoriasis, it's incurable. But within 6 months, she had new skin. My wife said, who had been a nurse, this was the worst case of psoriasis she'd ever seen. We loaned her Riley's book on drugless therapy. And when she returned it, it was full of little flakes of skin in so many pages. So we knew she'd really looked through that book. But one of the things my wife found, using kinesiology to get in deep to see what was going on, was it wasn't just castor oil packs and change of diet. And she discovered that anything that seemed to be chronic within people was due to resentment building up. And so she asked this lady if she had any resentment, and it turned out she was very resentful of her sister. And so they worked on that, and that seemed to be the key to getting rid of the psoriasis. Letting go of that chronic resentment got rid of the chronic disease. And of course, when she went to see the doctor said, don't worry, it'll come back. And she just told him, well, I'll be dead before that happens. So she was very happy that she had brand new skin. It was like a baby, my wife said. Now, the other one that I found very interesting was epilepsy. One of the things about epilepsy was a nervous system incoordination was always or mostly found to be one of the problems with epilepsy. And in one reading, straight after reading 25481, EDGAR Cayce interrupted Gertrude as she was bringing him out of the reading to say, again, we would insist that we have asked that it be taken as a study, as a thing or condition in the experience of mankind, that this organisation may give much to the world, and on one particular disturbance that has baffled the wise and the foolish, this study on that called epilepsy for 3 years, and you will be undefeatable. And that got its own reading number, 25482. The 254 series are the work readings. So my wife had a 37-year-old woman brought to her by her mother who had severe epilepsy. And so we researched the readings on epilepsy, discovered this whole idea of nervous system incoordination, which was mainly an incoordination between the cerebrospinal nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. And if you look up epilepsy in the circulating files, Bill McGarry has written up quite a program to help people with epilepsy, which was a 12-week program, which needed to be repeated if there was no success in the first 12 weeks. Well, my wife found that by giving this girl balances, getting her to use castor oil packs, and balancing the incoordination which she had between the two nervous systems, within just 2 1.5-hour sessions, she no longer had seizures. She'd had epilepsy for 30 years, was on the most powerful anti-epilepsy drugs that were available, and she was still having up to 6 seizures a day. 2 sessions with my wife, no more seizures. The other thing that my wife found was that this girl had 13 attached entities, which Cayce warned about in the readings, that people with epilepsy or any sort of shock or trauma or unconsciousness due to anesthesia or anything, or drugs, alcohol, can pick up attached entities. This girl had 13 of them. They were so ingrained into her that they were talking to her constantly, telling her to do things she didn't want to do, physically poking her. My wife has a technique of removing entities. She can do it even remotely. She doesn't have to be there with the client. And she got rid of these 13 entities, and the girl was amazed that she no longer had voices in her head. And she got her life back. She was able to become an active part of the community again. So, you know, it's just remarkable how something like kinesiology, which is, my wife uses energy for healing, muscle testing for diagnosis using kinesiology. But that I think the Cayce material was years ahead of its time in a way, because I think energy medicine is the way of the future with the Cayce healing modalities. It's just remarkable what can be diagnosed and alleviated using energy. Castor oil. You know, we sold so many castor oil packs over the years because we know personally and with people that have reported back to us how many things have been healed with castor oil. The castor oil was important with this 37-year-old girl that was brought to see Maria with epilepsy. But there was a couple of other cases that were brought to see Maria just after that particular case. There was a 9-year-old and a 10-year-old boy. They had what would be called fecal incontinence. They were still in nappies, or as most of you would probably call them, diapers, even at age 9 and 10. Their mothers had taken them to see doctors and specialists. No one could figure out why they had fecal incontinence. They both had autism spectrum disorder, varying degrees. And so my wife felt that castor oil packs would help, but she also checked because she just had a feeling that there might be an incoordination between the cerebrospinal and the autonomic nervous systems. Certainly there was. She corrected that. After a series of castor oil packs, both of these boys no longer had fecal incontinence. Matter of fact, one of the boys, their mother was told by their school teacher, he will never amount to anything because he was so bad in his schoolwork. And years later, he now has all of his grades are A grade. He's captain of 3 school teams. He's just, he's developed amazingly well. And even just within a couple of months after Maria's work with one of them, she had a phone call from the mother to say that they were on holidays in another state, and it was the first holiday they'd ever had where there'd been no fecal accidents. And she was just so thankful and relieved. And there was another child that was brought to see Maria, 3 years old, who refused to speak to anyone. And so Maria had seen the article in Venture Inward about the young children that were told to, there was a 28-day program for these young children that were also autism spectrum disorder children. And she was, these children had all developed extremely well with their autism after being on a 28-day program of castor oil packs. Maria mentioned this to the mother, so the mother would tried the castor oil packs on her little girl. The little girl came back and she actually was speaking. She had caught up with her language skills. When she was first brought to see Maria, she refused to look at Maria or even go near her. She actually came and sat on Maria's knee and spoke to her. The change was miraculous. And the added benefit was that this woman used castor oil packs on herself and healed her own endometriosis. So there was a lot of benefit from castor oil packs. So summing it all up, it's just been the most amazing journey for both my wife and I to have been involved in this work for all of these many, many decades. We will continue to be devoted to this work for hopefully more decades to come. I'm now 70, my wife's 73, but we still love this work. We love what we're able to do to help people. And my wife doesn't want to retire. I retired from my work as an architect 10 years ago. And I'm wondering now how I ever had time to work full-time as an architect. So thanks again, John, to yourself and to your team for putting this together. We would love to be involved in anything else that you are organising in future, because we just love this whole ARE family. We've missed getting back to Virginia Beach and being part of our spiritual family over there. But using Zoom, it's just like being back home again. So thank you so much, and God bless you all.
Thank you, Russell. Thank you so much. Thank you. There were a couple of questions for you in the chat, and they're asking about the game, how they can obtain the game. Now, I have a version of the game right here, but how you said, so there's no copies of the game available?
Well, look, I could probably get them. The problem is because it doesn't fold up, it's virtually impossible to send in the mail. But, nothing's impossible.
Okay, well, I guess people can contact you directly if they want to have a version of the game, or otherwise I can always sell my version on eBay. No, that's a joke. I would never do that. But yeah, absolutely. The question is, can the game be played on Zoom?
I'm not sure. We'll have to trial it. But I think you'd have to have one person moving the pieces around the board and selecting the cards for all the other people, which is still possible. Yeah, it could possibly be done. I noticed that someone's also asking what was the name of the individual who wrote up the epilepsy treatments. It's on the circulating files on epilepsy, and it was Dr. William McGarry, wrote up the epilepsy treatments in that file. And most of those treatments had to do with using passion flower fusion and certain holding and massaging of the spine over many, many weeks. Well, someone's been wanting to heal psoriasis since last January. The best book on that is Dr. John Bacano's books. He's got more than one. One Cause, Many Ailments is probably the best book to read about healing psoriasis.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, he had like a 90% success rate with healing psoriasis. It was just amazing, using the readings and his own experience.
Yes, and just remember, let go of any resentments because they do eat away at the lining of the gut.
Great. And I also think that Robin Budd also asked a question about can you give suggestions on how to motivate modern New Search for God members from interests that, however compelling, actually deviate from the very wise meeting structure. Specifically, I have noted that both dream discussion and the alternate reading options can quickly subsume focus on Cayce material.
Well, look, I'd just like to share that because our group had been looking at the Search for God books, 1, 2 and 3, we've been through, when we reached the end of book 3, we thought, what can we do now? Will we go back to the beginning? Will we start studying the readings on the book of the Revelation? We thought, no, that might be a bit heavy. So what we decided to do was to use Your Life, the book on the universal laws by Bruce MacArthur, as a study material, because it's all based on the Cayce readings. And after 5.5 years of working through that, using the same format as a Search for God study, we've just found it, but also knowing that we've spent many, many years doing the Search for God material, we found it really life-changing to incorporate all of those universal laws and awareness of universal laws into our lives as part of a study program over 5.5 years. It was just amazing. And since we just finished that, we've started on The Intelligent Heart by Bruce MacArthur's son. And also a lot of that material in that book was also prepared by Bruce, but he died before he could publish it. So, yeah, I recommend A Search for God naturally, but if you're really committed, you can study other Cayce material as well.
Yeah, are there any other questions for Russell?
Someone wanted the name of the books for psoriasis.
Yeah, I can, I have that right here. I can paste it in the chat.
Yeah, One Cause, Many Ailments. Dr. John Pagano, who was a chiropractic doctor. And the Universal Laws book, Your Life, Why It Is the Way It Is and What You Can Do About It. Study it and apply it, like anything else in the Cayce material. Please specify the Search for God format. I'm sure that Judith Stevens would be very happy to let people know what the format is for running a Search for God group. I'm not sure whether castor oil packs and endometriosis. There's a question here whether endometriosis is a circulating file. I presume that the castor oil pack would be placed over the abdomen for endometriosis.
Great. Are there any other questions for Russell? Fantastic. Well, it's been great to see you, Russell. It's been fantastic to see you, and it's so wonderful for the people in the rest of the world to meet our Australian brother and sister. Is Maria there with you?
Yes, I think she's still here. You'd like me to introduce Maria?
Sure.
I'll swap places with Maria. Beautiful Maria.
It's great to see you.
Hi, John. I've been sitting out here on the couch because, as you know, if I come here, Russell disappears. So I've been sitting out in the other room listening, which has been wonderful. So good to be part of this. What a great thing. Hi, Elise.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, I just wanted for everyone to see you because you're such a fantastic healer and psychic. So
thank you so much. Thanks, John. Bye.
Bye.